Hi.
I was rinsing the last plate when I heard the front door open. Too early. My husband never came home at this hour. A second later, his voice filled the house. "I'm home. Got someone with me." Something about the way he said it made me pause. He never brought people over unannounced. My hands, still damp from the sink, instinctively smoothed the front of my sweater. A habit from another life when I cared about how I looked at home. I stepped into the living room just as they walked in. My husband was carrying his usual work bag, but the man beside him was different, taller, leaner. He had the kind of presence that made a room shrink. His movements were measured like he was used to people watching him. "This is my new guy from work," my husband said, clapping him on the back. "Figured we'd go over some things here away from all the office noise." The man extended a hand. "Nice to meet you." I shook it. Firm grip, warm skin. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, held mine just a second longer than necessary. A flicker of something passed between us, but I told myself I imagined it. "Let me get you both some coffee," I said quickly, stepping back, needing the space. I moved to the kitchen, my breath a little unsteady. What was that? It wasn't attraction, not in the way people think. It was awareness, a shift in the air. I reached for the coffee canister, but my hands were shaking just enough for the spoon to clink too loud against the counter. Ridiculous. I'm married. He's just a guest. Through the open doorway I could hear them talking. My husband's familiar voice, comfortable and oblivious, filling the space. The guest, though, spoke less. When he did, his tone was steady, confident, like he knew how to control a conversation without dominating it. I forced myself to focus, measured the grounds, poured the water, steady hands. It's nothing. A normal evening. No reason to feel like the room is suddenly smaller. When I carried the tray back, they were deep in work talk. Graphs, numbers, projections, things I'd stopped pretending to care about years ago. My husband barely looked up, reaching for his cup without thought. But the other man? He looked at me. Not in any unsuitable way, but like he saw something. And for the first time in a long time, I wondered if I wanted to be seen. I told myself it was nothing. A meaningless glance. A trick of my own mind, bored with routine. But as the evenings passed, he kept showing up. Always with my husband, always for work. And yet each time I felt it. The shift in the air when he stepped inside. At first I avoided him, kept my distance. I stayed in the kitchen longer, busied myself with dishes, wiping down counters that didn't need cleaning. But avoidance made it worse. Because when I did look at him, when our eyes met across the room, something silent passed between us. It was subtle, too subtle to name, too obvious to ignore. One night I was pouring coffee when I heard him behind me. "You don't have to keep bringing this out," he said. "I can get it myself." I turned, startled, too close. He wasn't touching me, but the space between us felt non-existent. "It's not a problem," I replied, voice steady. He held my gaze, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. "You always take care of everything, don't you?" I let out a small laugh, brushing off the comment. But as I walked past him, his presence lingered. My husband never noticed. He came home tired, talked about work, and assumed I was listening. I nodded in the right places, smiled when expected, but my mind was elsewhere. One evening, when my husband stepped away for a call, I felt my phone buzz. A message. Just one word. "Tonight?" I stared at it, pulse quickening. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. But I knew in that moment I was standing on the edge of something I might not come back from. I should have ignored it. Should have deleted the message, pretended I never saw it. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, my heart pounding louder than it should have. One word. A simple word. But we both knew what it meant. My husband was still upstairs, his muffled voice drifting through the hallway as he talked on the phone. I could hear the familiar tone, the way he spoke when he was focused on work, the way he barely noticed anything else around him. I typed back, hesitated, then erased it. But the moment stretched too long, and before I could decide, another message appeared. "If not, I understand. Something about that made it worse. He wasn't pushing. He wasn't asking for more than I was willing to give. But that also meant the choice was entirely mine. No excuses. No way to pretend I wasn't in control of whatever was happening. I took a breath, put the phone down, and walked to the living room. He was sitting on the couch, one hand resting on his knee, the other lightly tapping against his phone. When he saw me, he locked the screen and slipped it into his pocket, as if that one movement erased the last few weeks of tension. I sat down, not too close, but not far enough to ignore what I was doing. My voice was even when I finally spoke. "I don't know what this is." He exhaled, a slow breath, measured and careful. "Neither do I." The silence between us felt heavier than words. Then, before I could stop myself, I whispered something I wasn't sure I was ready to admit. "But I think I want to find out." I told myself I wouldn't let it happen, that I'd stop before the line blurred, before it became something I couldn't take back. But some moments don't wait for permission, they just happen. It was late. My husband had gone to bed early, exhausted from another long day. I stayed downstairs claiming I had things to finish, but really I was just waiting. When he walked in, there was no hesitation, no small talk, no space left between us. It wasn't planned, but it wasn't an accident either. It was the weight of everything unsaid, everything ignored, colliding in an instant. I don't know who moved first. Maybe we both did. But then it was real, undeniable, irreversible. A moment held too long, breath caught between caution and certainty. And then, just like that, it happened. No words, no second thoughts. Just the quiet realization that we'd crossed the line we spent so long pretending didn't exist. For a second, neither of us moved. The air felt different, heavier. I should have pulled away, should have said something to break whatever this was. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I didn't want to. Then, just as quickly as it started, he stepped back. His eyes met mine, searching for something. Regret, hesitation, a reason to stop. But I didn't give him one. A sound from upstairs made me freeze. My husband shifting in bed, the faint creak of the floorboards. Reality rushing back, sharp and unforgiving. I took a step back, my pulse racing. "You should go," I whispered. He nodded, but he didn't look away. And as he walked to the door, I knew this wasn't over. I thought that night was the end of it. That stepping back, whispering "you should go," was enough to erase what had happened. But some things don't just fade. They linger, just beneath the surface, waiting. For days I told myself to move on. Act normal, keep my head down. My husband didn't notice a change. Why would he? His world spun in the orbit of work, numbers, deadlines. Mine had cracked open in silence. Then one evening it happened. He showed up again, not for work, not with my husband. Just him. I stood in the doorway, heart hammering. "You shouldn't be here." His expression didn't change. "You haven't told me to stop." The words sat heavy between us. Because he was right. I hadn't. I stepped back, letting him in. We sat in the dim glow of the kitchen, the silence stretching long. Neither of us knew what to say. Maybe there was nothing left to say. Finally I spoke. "This is dangerous." He exhaled slowly, nodding. "I know." I stared at my hands, searching for an answer. Was it regret, guilt, or was it something worse? Something that scared me more? He leaned forward just slightly, eyes locking onto mine. I could feel the weight of it, the pull that had been there since the beginning. And then, knock, 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 the front door. I froze. My husband wasn't supposed to be home yet. I looked at the clock, my pulse spiking. He was early. Panic shot through me. He couldn't see this. He couldn't see him here, alone with me. I stood, my mind racing. He followed, watching me carefully. "Go through the back," I whispered. He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. As he slipped out, I rushed to the front door, smoothing my sweater, forcing my breath steady. I pulled it open. My husband stood there, keys in hand, eyes scanning my face. Something was off. He looked at me too long, like he was searching for something. Then he spoke. I saw him. My stomach dropped. I know. The words knocked the air from my lungs, and then just as my mind spun, trying to make sense of it, his lips curved into something I never expected, a smile.
This is an artistic and fictional creation intended for both entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or events is purely coincidental. Some scenes and dialogues in the video are part of a dramatized performance and incorporate elements of grotesque, satire, and exaggeration. The creator stands against discrimination, violence, and hatred. This channel fully complies with YouTube's policies and does not infringe upon copyright laws.
Bye.